Hey, what's up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. Today we're going to work on this password generator app and we're going to do it with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now I am going to use Tailwind CSS, which I haven't used before in the channel, but that framework will help us speed up stuff a little bit and gives me a chance to show you Tailwind as well. Now you're going to see here that it works like you'd expect. You can pick a number of characters here, decide whether or not to include numbers and symbols, and then generate a password. It'll give you a little indication of how strong that password is each time you generate it, and then you can click and it will copy it to your clipboard. And we're going to do all this with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, now I'm about to show you the setup for all this. If you say, hey, I don't care about the setup, I just want to code along with you, go ahead and jump to the GitHub in the description. Just come to this branch for setup completed, and then you can either clone it or download it here as a zip file, open it up in your code editor, and then all you need to do is actually open up a local terminal and do npm I and let that run. It'll install everything, and then you can follow right along with us by doing npm run start to get the dev server up and going. In order to install this, you obviously will need Node.js on your machine. If you don't have it, you can come to nodejs.org and just download it here. And if you're not sure if you have it, you can do node -- version, and as long as you get something back, you should be good to go. With that installed and your server up and running, go ahead and use the timestamps below to just jump to the section where we're done with all the setup. All right, for everyone else, we're going to npm init -y. Doing -y there answers yes to all the default questions. And then I'm going to jump over here to the Parcel docs and click Get Started. This is a build tool, and it kind of specializes with not making you set up a bunch of stuff. So we're going to do npm install save dev parcel like that. And this might take just a second, so I'll be right back with you. Okay, so we've got everything installed there for us. Now, if I keep following down here, it tells us that we need to point everything to a specific file. And so we can do that if I keep coming down this way in our package scripts right here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these scripts and this source so I can point it to the right thing. And then open my package.json file and come in here, and we're just going to replace all of this like that. What we're saying is, hey, this is the source where you're going to have an entry point, and it'll be an index.html file we're going to place here, and then go ahead and use the start script to just do our dev server. The build script then would be like what you distribute on a site or something like that. All right, so we've got Parcel basically ready. Now let me jump over here to the Tailwind docs, and we're going to actually install things using PostCSS. So I'm going to copy all of this right here, and then come in here, and we're just going to add this down here below in this local terminal, and give it a second to install. All right, next it tells us to add Tailwind to our PostCSS configuration. Without going into a bunch of details, basically, we don't want to use this postcss.config.js because Parcel has some caching available. So if I come over here and do Tailwind, it'll actually give me some special instructions for that. And basically, the only difference is we need to add it to a JSON file called postcssrc. So if I come in here, we're going to do postcssrc like that. And then I'm just going to copy all of this and place it in here, and that should work. And now we can return back to the Tailwind docs. I'll have links for all this in the description. You'll see here, it basically tells us, hey, you have to tell us where to apply all this Tailwind stuff with your Tailwind config, which installed automatically for us. I'm just going to replace all that with what's here. And again, we're going to use an index.html file, so that will work well for us. Also, then we need a style sheet, and it just needs to include this. So we can call the style sheet whatever we want. I am going to put it in here, and so let's just call it style.css, and then I'm just going to paste that in there, and this basically gives it Tailwind's components and all these different classes and allows us to use all that. All right, finally, let's add the index.html file, so index.html, and I'm going to do some boilerplate code here, and we'll call this password generator app, like that. And then below here, let's go ahead and give this file the entry point of style.css, and it's a relative file path, so I'm just going to do a dot and a // and then we also are going to want up above here script src, and we're going to call this app.js, and it will be a type of module. Modules load automatically after the body anyhow, so we don't need to do a defer attribute. But I am going to come in here and add that file of app.js, and we'll just say console.log hello there. All right, that should work, and everything should be hooked up correctly. Now I'm getting yelled at here. Package.json. Let's see what's going on. Package.json. Let's make sure we save this. All right, that is what we want, so I'm just going to go ahead and overwrite that, and we should be good to go. Now, if we did everything correctly, if I come back to these Parcel docs and come back to the getting started, it then tells us we basically just need to run this script. So I'm going to say npm run start, and this should spin up a dev server that has Tailwind connected to it and everything ready to go. All right, and I can control click on this and open it up. And make sure something's happening here. Let's come in here and do an H1 that says hi, and it should show up, and it does right over here. And you can see that Tailwind's already applying some default styling, which is perfect. All right, now one thing I should have done before I started up this dev server, let's kill that, is install one more thing, and this is this password checker, strength checker. Let's grab the install right here, and I'm just going to install it like this, and that shouldn't take too long. We're going to use this once we get around to the JavaScript. All right, that install, let's go ahead and run our dev server again, get that back up and running, and we should probably double check that that is coming through. It is. Hello there. All right, perfect. Okay, cool. So we've got everything hooked up. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and build everything out. And if you skipped all that setup and you've jumped in with us here, welcome. We're going to go ahead and start writing some HTML. So let's give ourselves a little bit of space. I'm going to close down that sidebar. We're going to make this a lot smaller and then come inside here to the body. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some classes to this body. If you're not familiar with Tailwind, it's a low-level utility framework, which is different than a lot of those, so there's no pre-built components. Instead, you're basically writing one class per CSS property. Now, you might ask why that's important. It's mostly for once you start working on bigger projects, it cuts down on the code you need and then cuts down on having to create a bunch of random classes. And it's really built for more of a component-styled build. So you've got all these small components that then have their default styling set, and then you just grab them when you need them, and you're not having to write a bunch of this. Most of the things we typed in are going to look fairly normal to you. So like grid would be, obviously we're going to be setting a display of grid. And then we're going to say place items center, and then content center. That will keep everything in the center, in the middle of the page. And then text center will keep all the text centered. And then H screen is like 100% view height. And then background cover is what we're going to want, and then background center to center position that. And you can see here with this extension I have plugged in with VS Code, it's actually giving me the exact CSS that I'm writing with this class. Finally, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a style tag with a background image, and this will just be URL, and we're going to point it to that password background that I've got in the same directory, the same folder. Now, everything in that center card is going to actually be a main tag here. And I'm going to add a few things. First of all, we're going to have padding 6, which is a Tailwind class that gives kind of medium padding. On medium screen sizes, though, I want that padding to change to 10. Again, we're going to want this to be a grid, and then I want it to be a gap of 4, which is like grid gap. And I do want a backdrop blur of large, and then a rounded LG. And then I want the text color to be Zinc 100, which is a color in Tailwind, a default color. And then I'm going to set the accent to yellow 400. What I'm using here is Emmet to expand all this out quickly, and you can see how that works. Now when I save it, you can see I've got this little tiny block right here just with padding. This is the main tag, and then this is the background image. Now because the parent here, the main card, is a grid and it's got a gap between it, then each of these elements is going to be spaced out with gap 4. So what I'm going to do is come in here with an H1. We want this to be a text 4XL and font bold. And then we're just going to call this password generator app, like that, and that shows up. And I think I actually might change the background just slightly on this. So let's actually add a background. So we're going to do BG, and I'm going to do Zinc, and we'll do like 800. And then you can do opacity in Tailwind with a / and then a number. So like 5 gives me some opacity there. Oops. And if I space it out there, you can see it makes it a little bit darker. Let's do it heavier than that. How about like 30% opacity? And you can see now it's a little bit darker there. All right. I think that should help with some of the readability of the text. Okay, so the next thing we want is we're just going to divide this as a div. I don't need anything here. This is basically for that top input bar and then that meter element below. This is going to be an input, and it'll be a background Zinc of 50, which is that light, almost white color. I want it to be full width, though. The text here will be large, padding of 2, and then I want rounded small, which will give it kind of corners on it, those rounded corners. And then I want the text Zinc to be 800, so unlike the default lighter white color, I want this to be basically a black color. then I'm going to have the cursor be a copy cursor. So we get that nice effect. So if I come over here, you can now see I get this little copy element. You can see the rounded corners. If there were text in here, so if we came in here and had a value of something, then it would actually be that black color, which is this text zinc 800. Let's get rid of that. I do want to add a couple other things. So I want an ID on here of password. That will be the password we're generating. And then I want this to be marked as read only. That way people aren't typing in it and trying to type over the text. The next thing I want is something called a meter. Now you may not know what this is, but a meter is going to give us, if you can see here, it's this little bar, and you can actually set just default amounts, tell it what's low, what's medium, what's high, and then it'll actually set the color itself using the browser's custom styling. So I'm going to come in here and first of all give it an ID of strength, and then we're going to pass it some classes here. So I guess just one width of full. And you can see here, this is width 100%. That's what that means. Now here, I'm going to set the min here to 0. So the minimum it's allowed to be. And then the max I'll set to 100. And then I can define what low, high, and medium are. So I'm going to say low is 30, and then high would be 75. Now what I want to tell it next is what the optimum is. In other words, what would be like a really good number, all right? Would be 100% would be an optimum. And then I can set a value here, and if I said something like, I don't know, like 10, it's going to be red, and that's just default styling with this HTML element. If I now say 30, it should give me yellow. If I say like 60, we're still in yellow. Once I get to that high number of, let's see, 76, it'll now be green, and anything from 75 on up will be that green color, and that is just the default styling, again, with this meter tag. HTML can be pretty cool. All right, let's scroll down here. And the next thing we want to add is we're going to add areas for the character length, how many characters we want, and then check marks for including numbers, including symbols, and then finally a button. So we will have a div here with a class of flex, and then justify between, which is the same as justify content between. Then I want items center to keep everything vertically aligned, a gap of 3, border just the top here. We're going to do a border of 2, and then a padding top of 3. If I expand this out, now I can add 3 things. First of all, I want a label here, and this will be for the length. And this will just say characters. And then next I want an input, and this is going to have a background of zinc 50, just like our password above. Because I want it to go all the way across, I'm going to do flex of 1. And then I don't want this to be a type of text. I actually want it to be a range. And we're going to set this minimum to 8, the max to 30. And I'm going to set the default value here to 15. Finally, I'm going to name this as length, and then also give it that ID of length to tie it together with the label. Okay, so we've got just one more thing, and that is we're going to have a paragraph here with a background of zinc 50 once again. This will have a default width and a height, or a set width and a height of 8 for both the width and the height. And then just like the password box above, I want this to be zinc 800, and this will be grid, place, items, center. Inside here, I'm going to have a span, and this span is going to have an ID of length text and a class of cursor default, because I don't want people to think that they can change this text, and you'll see that here in a second. I'm going to give it 15 by default, which is the same as this value by default. So now if I come in here, I don't get like a text cursor to show me I can change this. And now because we did all the work on the classes there, we can actually just copy this down, and a lot of this is going to stay the exact same. So I'm going to change this to say include numbers. Then I'll change this to say include numbers. I can get rid of this paragraph tag altogether. And then we're going to change this to type of checkbox. And because this is a checkbox, I don't need all of this. I'm going to go ahead and change, let's see, both the length as the name and the ID here to include numbers. And then for a class, I actually want to copy out, let's see, I want both of these. And I'm going to change this out for the flex one. Then I'll also add a cursor of pointer. You can see here now I'm getting this little cursor of pointer, and they're spread all the way across. And now what we can do is copy all this down one more time, and we should be mostly set. So I'm going to grab this include numbers here, here, and here, which I just did with Command D, and change this to include symbols. Then I'll just change this to symbols. All right, now we've got only the button left. You see these should work properly, and eventually we get our text in there. So the last thing we need then is the button. So we're going to say button, and we're going to call it, let's call it generate, because this is what we're going to use to generate the password. Then I'm going to add some classes here, a background zinc 50, once again. You know what? Maybe what we should do is change this up. Let's do the same thing as the yellow accent. So what was that, like yellow 500, I think, something like that? I think for readability, then we're going to need our text Zinc 800, that dark text. And then maybe I'll even do a font bold to make sure you can really read it. Then we'll have a padding Y that's up and down of 2 and a padding X of 3. We'll have the same rounded small. And then let's actually add a hover state. So I'm going to do hover like this, and in Tailwind you can just declare hover states or active states or whatever with this syntax. And then we'll say background, let's do yellow like 50, something like that. All right, let's see what this looks like when we add generate password as the text. All right, so let's save that. Yeah, I mean, that's all right. Let's go ahead and add then transition colors, which is a default transition for colors in Tailwind. Now, if I come in here, we should kind of get it fading in and out. I think that's all right. Cool. All right, so we've got that set up and ready to go. Now, believe it or not, that's all the HTML and all the CSS. Now, if you haven't worked with Tailwind, that might seem kind of overwhelming. Tailwind is really built for people who already know how to write CSS well, and then you should be able to style things out with these classes. Like I said, again, it's meant really for more component-based builds, whereas we're just kind of writing it blankly here, and we're not going to reuse any of this anywhere. But as you can see, once you even do it on these inputs, it's pretty easy to copy it down, and you've got all your styling set. All right, so let's save that, and then let's jump over to our app.js. All right, let's go ahead and erase this console log, and let's think through what we're going to need for this project. So if you look over on the right, we need to be able to update the character number when we drag the slider. All right, and then everything else I think should be related to the actual generate password button. So we need to do an event listener on the generate password button. And when we do that, we need to know how many characters. We're going to need to know if we should include numbers or symbols. And then once we have that, we'll want to update the password field and update the, what was that tag called? The meter tag. And let's see if we need anything else. I guess we're also going to need to set up copying when we actually hit this button or this field when we click on that. And then, we'll also need to, I guess this is with the meter, but check the password strength. All right, so that's kind of, at least as I see it, what we're going to need to work on here. And so what we're going to do is, let's first of all just grab all of those different elements and let's just make them available locally here first. So let's go ahead and first of all just work on this character one, and then we'll come back and grab the other one. So what we're going to want is the length here, whatever this range is here. So let's jump back over this way, and let's see, input text. Where are we looking at? Text, range right here, and we call this length. All right, so let's come back here, and we're going to say length is equal to document.querySelector, and I'm going to grab the ID here of length. All right, so now that I've got that, what we need to do is grab the length, and we need to add an event listener on it. And since it's a range, what we want is any change to that range. All right, and then the change to the range, when we get that, we're going to send it to an arrow function. And all we want to do is say whenever that happens, we want to take the E, which is the event dot current target, so the thing the event was set against, which is this range slider, and we want to grab the value off of that. We want to say now that, let's see, we want this right here, and I'm trying to remember what we called that. So if you come over here, we had a span with an ID of length text. So let's go ahead and just put that up top too. I think that should work. So I'll come and grab both of those and then say length text like that. So what we want to do is say that the length text dot text content should now be equal to the e dot current target dot value. All right, so if we did that all correctly, let's go ahead and save this. Oh, let me erase that there, sorry. Let's save this, and then if we slide this, it should update. What are we doing wrong here? All right, so we've got a current with one R. All right, there we go. Okay, so that is working properly for us, which is great. So we've got that set up. Now, let's go ahead. Let me move this all the way to the bottom. I like to keep these event listeners on the bottom. And let's go ahead and think about the next thing we're going to need. So we did this already. We are now going to need to be able to click on the generate password button. And when we do that, we're going to have to grab all this stuff. So let's go ahead and grab what we think we're going to need up this way. I'm going to need the password field, which is that input field up top, just that white big blank box right now. This will be document.querySelector, and this had an ID of password, if I remember correctly. And then we're going to need the strength meter bar here. So let me copy this down, and we're going to grab this and call this strength. And that was the meter bar. And then I guess we'd need the button itself. So actually, let's copy this down again. I don't like this spacing here. Let's how about that? Okay, so we'll call this generate button, I guess. I think this just had the ID of generate on it. So we've got enough, and then the rest of this we can grab once we click the generate button. So let's go ahead and come in here. We're going to say generate button.add event listener, and we're listening for a click. And whenever we get that, we're going to pass it a function called generate password. All right, and we'll just pass that to the browser and let the browser do that for us. So let's come up here and write that function. So we'll say function generate password, and then it doesn't need to take anything in. But what we need to do up front is when we first generate the password, we need to grab the character length, and we should have that up here, whatever the value is of that range. And then we need to grab whether or not the numbers and symbols are included. So let's go ahead and do that now. And I'm just going to say const password, we'll just say pass length. How about that? And then we're going to set this to the length.value, which we had already grabbed globally up here. All right, so we've got that. Next, we're going to say include nums will be equal to document.querySelector. And I think that was just include numbers like this. And then we want to check if it's checked. This is going to return to us a true or false value because this is either going to be true or false. And let me just double check. Yeah, include numbers. And then let's see that for the label, and then this should be include symbols. Okay. So let's jump back over this way. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to select this and say include symbols. And then here we'll say symbols like that. Okay, so now we should have that. And if I console.log, and we're going to do the pass length, the include nums, and the include sims. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to jump over here and open up the console. And then if we click, we should get 15 false, false. Click this, change that, click it again. Now we're 23 true, true. Okay, so we're getting what we need whenever we click this button to know basically, hey, how should we construct this password? Now, when it comes to the password itself, we're going to have the characters. Those are uppercase and lowercase letters of the alphabet. Then we're going to have numbers, and then we're going to have symbols. Let's go ahead and add those globally up here as well. We're going to actually write some helper functions that will reference these. And I just got them on my clipboard, so you don't have to watch me type all of this out. But you can see there we've got the letters, and then we've got numbers, and then we've got some symbols. Now, a couple of notes about this. Number one, obviously you can grab it from the repo if you want. Secondly, you'll notice I don't actually have capital and lowercase. I just have lowercase. So we're going to have to worry about capitalizing these randomly when we create passwords, but we'll do that with a little helper function here in a second. All right, so let's come back down this way. And now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and just say I want a temp password. All right, so this is the password we're going to be constructing as we move through this little function, and we'll be adding to this string. Right now it's just set to an empty string. Now, all throughout the process, whether or not I have numbers, symbols, or characters or whatever, I want to basically randomly select from these. So I need a random number generator that's going to select random index from these different arrays. We'll also use that to randomly decide how many numbers or how many symbols to include, and then whatever's left over after we've included numbers and symbols, we'll fill up with characters. So like, let's say we had this set to 10. If I can get it to 10, I should have just left it where we're at. And let's say we want no more than a third of that to be numbers, no more than a third of it to be symbols, so 3 and 3 at most. So that leaves 4 left that would be filled with characters. And those characters, then we will capitalize and lowercase kind of randomly as well. So what I'm going to do is actually write a little object here. So we'll just call it utils, and we're going to write some functions in here, and this will keep track of some things that we're going to use in this generate password function. So the first thing will be a get random num between. All right, and in a object like this is a method. It's called a method since it's just a function within an object here. And we're just going to make this little arrow function. So we're going to grab a min and a max value. So numbers between is what we're going to grab between these two numbers. It can be a min or a max or anything in between. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say this needs to be math.random. Now, this is going to give us a random number between 0 and 1. And then what we want to do is wrap this in a math.floor. This is going to give us the integer at the floor of whatever the decimal is. Now, in this case, they would be 0. So what we need to do is actually do some math here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, first of all, let's go ahead in parentheses here, take the max minus the min, and then we're going to add 1 to it. And then finally, at the very end, after we've multiplied that already times that number from 0 to 1, we're then going to add back to it the min. So it's at least that number. In other words, it's possible from here that we would have 0, and so then we're going to add to it our minimum. So we're at the very minimum, we're going to be our minimum, and at the maximum, we would be our maximum. And because this is in an object, this needs to be a comma. Now we should be able to use this all throughout this generate password function to constantly grab random numbers as we need them. Now I also want to randomize which number or symbol or whatever character I grab from these arrays. And I want to make it to where I could get like 2 or 3 A's within a single password string. Otherwise, if I can only ever get things once, then it's not as random as it could be. So as much randomization as I can would be great. So I'm going to write another function here. We'll call this get cars from array. And this would just say, hey, we're going to get a random character from an array. And this one, we will again just make an arrow function. We're going to pass it an array, and then we're going to also pass it a number. That number is going to be how many times we want to grab something from an array. So like if we have 3 numbers, we would pass it 3 and then the numbers array. And by writing it as a function like this, we could also use it the same way for the symbols array. So if we want 4 symbols, then we can say, let's pass it the symbols array, and we'll pass it 4. So it goes through this loop 4 times. Then let's go ahead and come in here, and inside here, we're going to have a temporary variable called cars for characters, and this will just be an empty string. And then we'll have a for loop in here that says let I equal 0. And then we'll say as long as I is less than or equal to whatever the number is that we've passed in, then we can continue to loop through this, and I'm going to say plus plus. All right, so in other words, it's going to iterate on the I variable inside here. Now what we want to do is during each of these loops, so each time we're looping through the array, like of symbols in this case, we want to randomize which one we grab. So we can actually use the one we just wrote, that little function we just wrote. So we're going to say const, let's just call this rand number, and we're going to say utils.get random num between. And we're saying utils dot because this is part of the object. That's where we placed this little helper function. We're going to pass it then 0, so it could be the 0 index all the way up to array.length minus 1. So grab some random number there. Each time it's going to re-randomize it. Then we'll say cars plus equals the array rand number. All right, so in other words, you're going to get a random index from whatever array we want. And then after all this looping, we are going to return the cars. All right, hopefully that makes sense, and I think you'll see it in practice here. We're going to come back and change one thing here in just a second. So the first thing we're going to do is, like I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and fill it up with numbers, then with symbols, assuming we need one of those, and then whatever's left over, we will then have characters that fill up the rest of the password string. So let's write this as an if statement, and we're going to say if include nums. So if we need to include numbers, then what we're going to do is say that temp password, which is this empty string up here, should be added to like this. So plus equals, we're going to say utils.get cars from array. And in this case, this is the numbers array. So we're going to pass it the numbers array first of all. And then we're going to pass it, as far as the number, what we want is, again, a randomized number, but within a certain range. So we want it to be at least, let's say, if they check numbers, we want it to be at least 3 numbers, something like that. I think the lowest we let them was 8 on this. So we'll say that. So 3 for the low point, and then the most we want, as far as numbers are concerned, would be maybe 1/3 of the total length of whatever this character's length is. So like we wouldn't want it to be 12 numbers and like 2 letters or something like that. So let's go ahead and say utils, and this will be .get random num between. We'd say 3 for the minimum, and then for the maximum would be password length divided by maybe 3, something like that. All right, so let me walk through this one more time. Assuming we did this all correctly, what we're saying is if they've checked the numbers, so if this is true, if it's a truthy statement, then what we want to do is update this password string by saying, hey, get a random character from the array, and we're going to pass in this function right here. We're going to send it the numbers array, and then the number we're going to send it is a randomized number between either 3, it has to have at least 3 numbers in the password, all the way up to 1/3 of the total password length that we've given it. Each time then through this loop, it's going to randomize which number of the array, the numbers array it's going to grab, and then it will add it to this temporary variable and return it to us. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to grab this here and we'll just console.log the temp password. Okay, so I'm going to save it, pull this up over here, and hopefully we got this correct. Now we do need to check this just to make sure that we're actually going to be inside this if loop, and now we're getting 5. So if I click again, now it's 4. 5, we should never have less than 3, and we should never have more than, let's see, 1/3 of this. And now we are getting 6 there, but I think that's because I had it as minus or equal, so I could just change this, check this again, and I think that will limit us to 5, yeah. I said less than or equal to, and this should just be, yeah, less than. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now we just need to duplicate the same functionality with the symbols. So if include, let's see, sims like this. Then what we want to do is the same thing, except we're going to pass in symbols. So those are going to happen one after the other, these little checks. After this, what we need to then figure out is how much space do we have left in our character string. So let's say we were supposed to have 15, like we've got over here on the right, and we've added maybe like 4 numbers and maybe 3 symbols, something like that. So we should have 8 left. So what I want to do is say, let's go ahead and console.log, and I want the pass length minus the temp password dot length. And since it's a string, we've got that method available to us. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's check this and this. And we got 9 left over, 8 left over. So maybe what we should do is let's go ahead and see what the temp password is first. So like that. All right, so let's come over here, check this and check this. So this is what we've got so far. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we should have 7 left over, and that's what we've got. Do it again. 6 left over, 8 left over, 6, 9, 7. So you can see it's giving us whatever number we have left. So this will actually tell us how many characters we need to fill up. So let's come in here, and instead of console.logging, what we're going to do is say temp password plus equals. So we're going to add to that string. And again, we're going to use our utils .getChars like this. And we're going to pass in, first of all, the letters array. And then the second argument, the actual numbers, will be that length, whatever we have left to fill up our password string. So let's go ahead and save that. And then let's grab this temporary password again, and let's console.log it like this. And then I'll check here, and you see now we're getting that. Now, there's a couple things we need to notice. Number one, you see we're getting numbers first, then symbols, and then the letters every time, no matter what we do. So there's different amounts. It's varying how many we include of each, which is good. But we want to actually jumble that up. And then the second thing you'll notice is that, again, all of these letters are lowercase. Now, you can't uppercase symbols or uppercase numbers. So we could actually probably just go ahead and come back up here, and let's just kind of randomly uppercase these. Now, there's several ways we could do this, but we're getting a random number to pull from the array, and that number will either be odd or even. So what we could do is just use that and figure out basically if it's odd or even. So what I'm going to do is run a little ternary here. So we're going to grab the random number, and then we'll use this, I think that's what called the remainder or something like that, but basically it's going to give us whether or not, when you divide it by 2, if there's anything left over. So we're going to say if that equals 0, so if there's nothing left over, then we'll know that it was an even number. If there is something left over, we'll know it was an odd number. So we'll just use it as a truthy statement, yes or no. We'll say if that happens to be true, then we're going to take the cars and we're going to say plus equals array rand number like that. So that's what we had before. Otherwise, we're going to say the cars and say plus equals array rand number dot to uppercase. And again, this lives on those strings. There may be a better way to do this. If you have an idea, let me know, but this is just kind of what came to my mind. Now, if I save this and come back over here and generate a random number, you'll see now, even before I check these, you're going to see that we're getting random uppercases and random lower cases. And again, it shouldn't affect the symbols or the numbers at all, so I think that should be good to go. Okay, so we've got that. That's the first problem we had to worry about. The other problem we had to worry about was the fact that you've got numbers and then symbols and then letters, always in that order. So what we actually need to do is randomize this a little bit more. So let's go ahead and grab this. We're going to split this on nothing. That should give us an array of all the characters in our password string. Then we're going to dot sort it like this. And let's write a little function here where we just say math.random. And then we're going to subtract from it 0.5. Now, because math.random gives us a number between 0 and 1, sometimes that'll be a negative number and sometimes that will be a positive number, which means it will just randomly sort these items, because the way the sort method works, as you can see even here, is that it basically expects a negative value if the first argument is less than the second, 0 if they're equal, a positive otherwise. So it's going to basically just randomly sort them in front or behind, depending on what we happen to get from here. Then what we're going to do is once we get that array back from the sort method, then we're going to join it again on nothing, which turns it kind of back into a string. So if I save this and grab it like this, well, that's not going to show anything. We should now, so now we've got randomized numbers in letters. And you see that just all over the place. That's just what you want. So now let's go ahead and do this. We don't need to console.log out. What we do need to do is update this password field. And I think that was just called password. So we'll say password.value is now going to be equal to that. So we don't need a console.log it anymore. Now it's actually showing up there. Perfect. Okay, cool. So let's see, we've done this. We've figured out how many characters, how many symbols. We've updated the password field. We need to now update the meter tag and set up copying. So let's see. Let's go ahead and first of all set up copying because I think that'll be quicker. So let's see. What was that field called? Just password. So password.add event listener. And we're going to pass or say if it's clicked. Then we'll pass to handle password click. Something like that. All right. Let's come up here. We'll say function here, handled password click. Let's go ahead and pass it the event. And the first thing we want to check is if there's any value in that field. Because if there's not, we don't need to copy anything. So we'll just say e.currentTarget, which is the thing it was called against, .value is equal to nothing like that. And then we'll say if that's the case, then go ahead and just jump straight out of this and do nothing. So if I save this again and I come up here and click, nothing should happen. All right. Otherwise, maybe let's console.log. Something is happening. Like that, and then click, nothing's happening. Let's put something in there, and now something's happening. Okay, so you see it got past that little return statement. Now what we're going to do is we want to figure out what the password is that we want to copy. So we'll say password to copy, like that, is equal to password dot value. And then we can just use the navigator here and say navigator clipboard, like this, dot write text, and then we'll pass it the password to copy. Now, because the user is taking some action, we can just directly write to their clipboard because they're the ones who acted and made this all happen. Then what we want to do is go ahead and say password dot value is equal to copied. This is an I. Sorry about that. So if I come in here, we generate something, we click here, it should now password to copy. Is that not what I called it? Password. Like that. Okay, let's try again. Click. Okay, now it says copied. All right, now eventually I want it to go back to the actual text. So if they want to see it again, they can do that. So let's go ahead and do a little set timeout here. Set timeout. And we'll say inside here, we don't need to pass in anything. This will just be a little arrow function. And we'll just say password dot value is equal to pw2 copy. All right, so we're going to set it back to what it originally was, which is why I grabbed it out into a variable here. So I'll save that there, and then we'll set it to something like 2 seconds, so 2,000 milliseconds. Grab it here, click after 2 seconds. Now it goes back to what it was. Okay, cool. So I think the last thing we've got to do now is do this update meter tag. We're actually going to do this inside here when we generate the password, because every time we generate it, we want to update this meter tag to decide basically how strong it is. Now, we've got this npm package that we grabbed, and this is what we're going to use. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to go ahead and import this. And since I'm using, so I'm going to scroll up to the top here. Let's just add this up top. So we're going to import that because we're using Parcel. All that should work correctly. Now if I run down here, let's see. So it's going to pass in. If we pass it this password strength and then send it some password, some string, it's going to output this to us. And you see it's got a few different kind of settings it's going to output. 2 weak, weak, medium, and strong, and these are kind of the default values. So let's first of all come up here, let's see, to our generate password. And at the very end here, let's go ahead and add something in right here. So we'll say const, let's call it like password quality, something like this. And then we'll say password strength, like this, because that's the function that is part of this npm package. And then we're going to pass it our temp password. And then let's go ahead and just console log this password quality. So console log password quality like this, and come back over this way, generate this, and this is what we're getting, this output that it said we should be getting. So it's saying it contains 2 lowercase and uppercase. There are several other things it could include, so symbol and or number. And basically it's saying here the way they've kind of delineated this is by default it has to have, let's see, 2 is weak, so if it has at least 2 of those, it would be weak. 4, it could be strong, or medium, if it's 8 characters or longer, and then strong has to be 10 characters or longer with a minimum diversity of at least 4 of these things. So let's come back this way, and we're going to see we've only got 2 here, and so it's giving it the ID of weak. And that makes sense with the default values that we've got. So there's no way for it to be medium because there's only 2 of these different varieties here. Now, if you come down here, it does give you these default options, and then it says that you can actually override them here by providing your own array. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this right here. And it says it can be passed in as a second item. So this second parameter here. And let's go ahead and update this a little bit. Since the minimum we're only gonna allow will be 8 anyhow. Let's set that to 8, and then I'm gonna set this to let's set this to 8 too. Other than that, I think we'll keep that the same. For medium, we'll set that to 4 and 12. So it needs to be at least 12 characters. And here we're gonna say this needs to be at least 16 characters, just showing you kind of how you might be able to update this if you want to change it out. All right, so let's go ahead and grab that. We're good there. This password quality then, instead of being a console.log, what I need to do is basically figure out which of these different things we've been passed back. So we can look on the ID or the value. Either of those will work. I think since the value is a string and it's just a strong, medium, whatever, I think that's plainer for me to work with. So I'm going to just grab this here. We're going to write a little switch statement. The switch statements are ideal when you have a few different options you could receive back and you just want to respond differently depending on the option. You could also write an if statement. There's several different ways to handle this. All right, so we're going to have a few different cases, and the first one might be 2 weak. So if I got that back, then what I want to do is grab the strength, which is the range, or not the range, what was that thing called again? The meter. You can tell I don't use meters a lot. Strength.value. We're going to set this to, we can do whatever we want, but if you remember correctly, if I jump back over here to the index.html and we find our meter here, we set the low to 30, and then we've got a high at 75. So maybe let's do this. Let's just set a random number, because if we always do like 8 for a week, then no matter what we do, it's going to always be the exact same, which will be a little odd if there's something that's clearly a lot more secure. So maybe let's just randomize it. We've got our utils, so let's use that. So let's say get random num between. We'll say anywhere between 0 and 10. Just pick one of those, and that's what we're going to call 2 weak. All right, and then we'll break from this. And then let's copy this down like that. And the next option was weak, so like that. And we'll say between maybe 10 and I think 30 was our low. And I think that gives us that red color still. Copy down again, and the next option we might get back would be medium. And we'll set this, you can pick anything between 30 and 74, since 75 was going to be our strong case. And then I can come up here and say strong, and again, this was going to be, let's see, 100 at the most, and 76, 75 at the least. I see something that's wrong already. I'm just passing this entire object I'm getting back. All I need is actually the value from it. So let's do dot value. That's the property that I'm concerned about. So now I should be able to generate this. Util, this should be utils. So I'm gonna grab all those. Oh, and I grabbed one too many, sorry. Let's come back down here. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll add an S on each of those. All right, let's try again. Click it, hey, look at that. So it's a weak password. Come up here, I need to include a number and a symbol maybe. Now that's strong, all right, that's good. And then this one didn't happen to include as many. Let's see, why is it so weak? All right, let's check this here. What is going on? let's see, the value is 22. So it's grabbing it from here. What do we set weak to? So it has to have minimum diversity of 2 and a minimum length of 8. So let's come back over here. Weak, minimum length. I'm not totally sure why that's showing it as weak then. Well, maybe you know. All right, if you know why that's happening, let me know. See, it should be strong pretty much every time for these. If I come down low, I could see that. Or if I uncheck one of these, certainly. Well, if I'm missing something obvious there, let me know. I'm not seeing it right now off the bat, but it's working. And if I come here and copy it, I should be able to come up here and paste that, which is cool. All right, so we've got this now working. Now, before I close out here, let me just remind you of one thing. On a lot of these larger projects here, I do have a branch called Community Improvements, and I'd love to see you kind of improve this and make it better. So if you're interested in kind of like tagging along with me and saying what you might be able to do to make this a little bit better, let me know. When you're all done with a project like this with Parcel, what you can do is come in here and run that other script we wrote. So you'd say npm run build is what it's called. And if I open up the sidebars, you can see, let's see. You know what? I think the default said the main should be index.js. I don't think we got one of those. So let's try again, npm run build. And it is now optimized all these and set them in here. Now, I've got both the dev ones and the default build ones inside the same directory. So what I probably want to do is close all this out first of all and delete those, and then run it one more time just so I'd have the final build scripts. So this is what I would then pass off to my actual server and then run all this code. You can see it's performant, it's compressed, even the HTML is, and certainly once you get into the JavaScript, they've minified it. They've also renamed a lot of the functions just to make them more performant and shorter. Same thing with the CSS. And because we are using Tailwind and we added that outer prefixer, we're even getting these Moz tab size and WebKit, and it's again all compressed and ready to go. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that. Let me know if you have any thoughts. I'd love again to have you interact with me on the community improvements. Let's make this thing even better. The biggest help you could be for the channel is to like this video and then tell somebody about it. If you do 50% of that, that would be awesome. All right, thanks so much. I will catch you in the next one. Happy coding.